breaking news from the heartland of American manufacturing, and it's a bombshell that just sent shockwaves through trade relations across North America. US President Donald Trump just declared that the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, the very trade deal he himself negotiated and signed, is now irrelevant. Standing on the factory floor of a Ford plant in Dearborn, Michigan on Tuesday, Trump made it clear. America doesn't need cars made in Canada or Mexico anymore. But here's what makes this truly alarming. We're just months away from the mandatory 2026 CUSMA review, and Trump is essentially tearing up the rulebook before negotiations even begin. What does this mean for hundreds of thousands of auto workers on both sides of the border? How will this reshape the entire North American manufacturing landscape? And why are major automakers sounding the alarm? Today, we're breaking down the three critical impacts of Trump's stunning declaration: the immediate threat to integrated supply chains, the jobs at stake, and the potential economic fallout that nobody's prepared for. This is Conway Analysis. Let's be crystal clear about what just happened. On January 13, 2026, during a visit to Ford Motor Company's plant in Michigan, President Trump stated on the record, "There's no real advantage to it. It's irrelevant. Canada would love it. Canada wants it. They need it." He was talking agreement, a trade pact that governs $1.66 trillion in annual trade between the three nations and directly impacts hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs. Trump went further, declaring, we don't need their product. We don't need cars made in Canada. We don't need cars made in Mexico. We want to make them here." And that's what's happening. But is it actually happening? The data tells a very different story, and it gets worse. According to the agreement's own terms, CUSMA is up for a mandatory 6-year review this year. If all three countries agree to renew it before July 1, 2026, the deal extends for another 16 years. If they don't reach agreement, annual joint reviews become mandatory until either they approve it again or the pact expires completely in 2036. We're talking about a deadline that's less than 6 months away, and the US president just called the entire agreement irrelevant. The Detroit 3 automakers, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, are heavily reliant on supply chains that stretch across all three countries. These companies produce hundreds of thousands of vehicles annually in both Canada and Mexico. According to the American Automotive Policy Council, CUSMA enables automakers operating in the US to compete globally through regional integration and accounts for tens of billions of dollars in annual savings. We're not talking about small numbers here. We're talking about the backbone of North American auto manufacturing. Mark Roos, president of General Motors, stated at an automotive event just hours after Trump's comments, "Our supply chains go all the way through all three countries. It's not simple. It's very complex. The whole North American piece of that is a big strength." Ford CEO Jim Farley echoed this sentiment, saying, "We really see Canada and Mexico and the US as an integrated manufacturing system." So when the President of the United States dismisses this integrated system as irrelevant, we need to understand exactly what's at stake and who pays the price. Here's the kicker. Trump isn't just making empty threats. His administration has already demonstrated a willingness to undercut CUSMA during his second term. Since returning to office in 2025, Trump imposed, then partially rolled back, new tariffs on Mexican and Canadian products, 25% tariffs on automobiles to be exact, justifying the move by claiming that fentanyl trafficking flows through both countries. He later exempted products covered by CUSMA, but the damage was already done. According to reports from multiple Canadian sources, Since Trump began this tariff assault in March 2025, Canada has lost more than 50,000 manufacturing jobs, the majority of them concentrated in Ontario's automotive sector. The Canadian economy shed 40,800 jobs in July 2025 alone, compared with a net addition of 83,000 jobs in June. The employment rate plummeted as Trump's tariff policies created chaos in cross-border trade. But here's what Trump isn't telling you. These tariffs don't just hurt Canadian workers. A comprehensive study by the Brookings Institution calculated that a sustained 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico would result in over 177,000 American job losses directly tied to the automotive sector. If Canada and Mexico retaliate with equivalent tariffs, that number explodes to over 400,000 American jobs lost. Let me repeat that. 400,000 American jobs at risk because of a trade policy that Trump claims will bring manufacturing back. The Tax Foundation analyzed Trump's broader tariff strategy and concluded that these tariffs represent the largest U.S. tax increase as a percentage of GDP since 1993. Their research shows that Trump's tariffs amount to an average tax increase of $1,500 per U.S. household in 2026. That's money coming directly out of American families' pockets in the form of higher prices for vehicles, parts, and consumer goods. Now let's talk about what makes the automotive supply chain so complex. When Ford builds an F-150 truck in Dearborn, Michigan, that vehicle contains components manufactured in all three CUSMA countries. Engine blocks might be cast in Canada, wiring harnesses assembled in Mexico, and final assembly completed in Michigan. A single vehicle crosses the US-Canada border multiple times during its production. This isn't inefficiency. It's strategic integration that keeps costs competitive against Asian and European automakers. Stellantis warned in November 2025 that under Trump's 15% tariff structure with Japan, US vehicles complying with North American content rules will continue to lose market share to Asian imports, to the detriment of American automotive workers. Think about that irony for a moment. Trump's tariffs designed to protect American jobs are actually handing market share to Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. Here's a historical parallel that should terrify anyone paying attention. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. During the Great Depression, the US raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods to protect American industries. The result? International trade collapsed by 66% between 1929 and 1934, and the tariffs are widely credited with deepening and prolonging the economic crisis. Trump's approach, imposing tariffs first, threatening to abandon trade agreements, then demanding renegotiation from a position of economic coercion, follows a disturbingly similar pattern. US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has already signaled that the Trump administration is considering splitting up the three-way CUSMA pact and negotiating separate bilateral deals with Canada and Mexico. This divide-and-conquer strategy would eliminate the bargaining power that comes from trilateral cooperation and likely result in weaker protections for all parties. To understand just how integrated North American auto production has become, consider this. Ford CEO Jim Farley warned that Trump's tariff breaks for Japanese exports, lowering the rate to 15%, gave Toyota a $5,000 to $10,000 cost advantage on SUVs over Ford, despite Ford building its SUVs in the United States. When American companies building American vehicles can't compete because of American tariff policy, something is fundamentally broken. And here's the part that should concern everyone. Trump made these irrelevant comments while standing in a Ford factory surrounded by American auto workers, whose jobs depend on the very trade agreement he was dismissing. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Major automakers urged the Trump administration last year to extend CUSMA, explicitly stating it is crucial to American auto production. They're not saying this because they love free trade in abstract terms. They're saying it because their business models, their investments, their supply chains, and their workers' jobs all depend on cross-border integration. David Patterson, Ontario's trade representative in Washington, tried to put a diplomatic spin on Trump's words, suggesting this is just the beginning of any negotiation, where Trump starts from a position of stated dominance. But when you're negotiating with a partner who declares the entire agreement irrelevant before talks even begin, you're not negotiating. You're being held hostage. So, who actually pays the price when Trump declares CUSMA irrelevant? Let's break down the impact by category, because this affects far more people than you might think. First, and immediate uncertainty. Plants in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee that rely on parts from Canada and Mexico are vulnerable. If CUSMA collapses or gets renegotiated unfavorably, automakers will need to restructure their entire supply chains, a process that takes years and billions of dollars in investment. During that transition, plants close, workers get laid off, and communities suffer. Beyond direct auto jobs, consider the ripple effects. For every automotive manufacturing job, economists estimate 17 out of 10 additional jobs exist in the surrounding economy. Part suppliers, logistics companies, restaurants, retail stores. We're talking about entire communities built around automotive manufacturing that could see devastating economic impacts. And remember that $1,500 per household tax increase, that's not a one-time hit. If Trump follows through and CUSMA falls apart, Americans will pay higher prices for new vehicles indefinitely. The average new car price in America is already over $48,000. Add thousands more due to tariff costs and domestic sourcing requirements, and vehicle ownership becomes unaffordable for millions of middle-class families. Think about the small machine shop in Windsor, Ontario, that makes specialized components for Detroit automakers, or the logistics company in Laredo, Texas, that moves automotive parts between Mexico and US assembly plants. These businesses operate on thin margins and have zero ability to absorb a 25% tariff increase. According to industry analysts, thousands of small and medium-sized suppliers across North America face potential bankruptcy if CUSMA collapses. These aren't abstract numbers. These are family-owned businesses that have operated for generations, employing real people with mortgages and families to support. Take the example of a mid-size stamping plant in Ontario that produces door panels for GM and Ford vehicles. This plant employs 200 workers and generates $30 million in annual revenue. If tariffs make their products uncompetitive, that plant doesn't gradually scale back. It shuts down completely. Those 200 workers don't find equivalent jobs in their community because automotive manufacturing is the only major employer. This same story repeats hundreds of times across Ontario, Michigan, and Mexican border states. Ford, GM, and Stellantis have invested tens of billions of dollars building integrated North American manufacturing networks under the assumption that CUSMA would remain stable. Ford's CEO explicitly stated that the trade deal is critical for the industry. If Trump forces a renegotiation or lets CUSMA lapse, these companies face impossible choices. It absorb massive cost increases and watch their stock prices crater, or restructure their entire production footprint at astronomical expense. General Motors has already signaled that major restructuring could be necessary. Stock prices for all three Detroit automakers have shown volatility since Trump's latest comments, with investors uncertain about the future regulatory environment. Meanwhile, Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai, which have structured their North American operations differently, could gain significant market share if Detroit's integrated supply chains become non-viable. Canada and Mexico are discussions with his Mexican and US counterparts as part of the joint CUSMA review, noting that the interests of Canada's workers and businesses will always be front and centre. But what leverage does Canada actually have when Trump declares the deal irrelevant? Prime Minister Mark Carney is currently on a 9-day trip starting in China, meeting with President Xi Jinping to explore alternative trade partnerships. That's not a coincidence. Canada is actively preparing for a world where economic integration with the United States is no longer reliable. Amanda Alvaro, a former Liberal communications strategist, stated bluntly, "Nobody can predict what will happen with Trump. Nobody can predict what will happen with the renegotiation of CUSMA." And that uncertainty, that fundamental unpredictability, is itself causing enormous economic damage, even before any formal policy changes occur. Experts across the political spectrum are sounding alarm bells about Trump's approach. The American Automotive Policy Council, representing the Detroit 3 automakers themselves, has explicitly stated that CUSMA enables automakers operating in the US to compete globally through regional integration, which delivers efficiency gains and accounts for tens of billions of dollars in annual savings. These aren't trade policy theorists. These are the actual companies whose CEOs Trump was standing next to when he made his irrelevant comments. Mark Roos from General Motors couldn't have been clearer. Our supply chains go all the way through all three countries. It's not simple, it's very complex. The whole North American piece of that is a big strength. Ford's Jim Farley echoed this, emphasizing that North America functions as an integrated manufacturing system. When the people actually running these companies are publicly contradicting the president's narrative, that's not partisan politics. That's reality conflicting with rhetoric. The Brookings Institution's economic analysis projects catastrophic job losses if Trump follows through. Their research shows that a 25% tariff, sustained over time, could eliminate more than 177,000 American jobs directly, with that number potentially exceeding 400,000 jobs if retaliatory tariffs come into play. The Tax Foundation's analysis is equally grim. Trump's tariff strategy represents the largest tax increase as a percentage of GDP in over 30 years, costing the average American household an additional $1,500 annually. Now let's talk about the legal and political implications. CUSMA was Trump's signature achievement during his first term. He literally campaigned on replacing NAFTA with a better deal. Now he's calling his own achievement irrelevant. This creates a legitimacy declares a trade agreement negotiated by the United States to be worthless. Why would any country trust future American trade commitments? Trade Representative Jameson Greer's suggestion to split CUSMA into separate bilateral deals fundamentally misunderstands why the trilateral structure exists. Integrated supply chains require trilateral coordination. A part manufactured in Mexico, refined in Canada, and installed in the US doesn't fit neatly into bilateral frameworks. In the short term, the next 30 to 90 days, we can expect several concrete developments. First, Canadian and Mexican officials will attempt to initiate formal review discussions before the July 1st deadline. Second, automotive companies will begin scenario planning for various outcomes, including potential plant closures and supply chain restructuring. Third, stock market volatility will continue as investors price in the uncertainty. Already, automotive stocks have shown weakness since Trump's comments. Looking at the medium term, 6 to 12 months, the picture gets darker. If Trump actually allows CUSMA to lapse or forces a renegotiation that fractures the agreement, we'll see plant closure announcements, significant job losses on both sides of the border, and higher vehicle prices hitting consumers. The Bank of Canada has already warned that trade conflicts will lower incomes in Canada, disrupt the supply chain, and stoke inflation. Those same consequences apply to American workers and consumers. Let's recap the three most critical points. First, Trump has declared CUSMA, his own signature trade achievement, to be irrelevant just months before the mandatory 2026 review, creating massive uncertainty for the entire North American automotive sector. Second, hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the border are directly at risk, with economic analysis projecting potential losses exceeding 400,000 American jobs if this trade conflict escalates. Third, American families will pay the price through higher vehicle costs, an average of $1,500 per household, in additional tariff-related expenses. Here's the bottom line. When the President of the United States stands in an American auto plant and dismisses the trade agreement that makes that plant economically viable, we're not watching normal negotiating tactics. We're watching economic policy chaos in real time. What do you think happens if CUSMA actually collapses? Does Trump have a real plan to replace these integrated supply chains? Or is this just negotiating bluster that could backfire catastrophically? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay informed on stories the mainstream media won't fully cover, make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon. The workers standing behind Trump during that Ford plant visit deserve better than uncertainty about their economic future being used as a bargaining chip. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next.